Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis. Good morning. So today we have to again cover 5 to 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Looking at the text and context today, we had a good set of two very important topics out of text and context, which is how the Supreme Court has redefined or is redefining the meaning of industry. Thereafter, FDI and a rule change, which is being talked about. Thereafter, from the science section, we have a very interesting article on how this El Nino is going to be record breaking. Then, privatization of airports, new rules for medical devices, and last but not the least, out of PIB, UPI completing 10 years. Now, do understand one thing. The reason, because some of you have commented, the reason why I don't give you page numbers per se is because by edition, the page number would change. So the some articles are out of the international edition, Delhi edition, the number of pages is different. Therefore, the topics also change and also the page numbers change. So you can find this easily in the Hindu newspaper, but the page number would be specific to that edition itself, which you are referring to. Remember, text and context does not come in regional editions of the Hindu newspaper, only Delhi and international. So therefore, all these articles are relevant for the UPSC, you can say prelims and mains examination, and therefore we will do it. Now, before we begin, remember that the 16,999 plus 12 months extension offer is live right now, will end on 27th of August. And you have to use the code IAS English to be tagged to our team and to also get mentorship from us. Now, with this, let's enter our first article, which is how is the Supreme Court ruling changing the definition of industries. Now, the context of this article is quite interesting because the new Industrial Relations Code 2020 are now coming into force. And what it is doing is, it is replacing a legacy act called the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. And there was a specific definition for industry in this legacy act of Industrial Disputes Act. And at the end of the day, industrial disputes are a very important part of the relationship, which is unequal between an industrialist and his workers. Now, the Supreme Court, a 9-member constitutional bench, has now asked to reconsider this industry definition, which was pushed through in 1947 for the new code itself. So the context is very clear. In 1947, there is a certain, you can say, Industry Dispute Act which comes through. That has a definition for industry. That is redefined in 1978 when there will be a very important judgment in Karnataka. That definition has been applied till 2025. And now when the Industrial Relations Code is coming through of 2020, they want to reconsider that definition. This is the context. Now, please do understand one thing, that the definition which we use today before the Industrial Relations Code was defined in 1978 by a judgment which is called the Bangalore Water and Supply Sewage Board versus R. Rajachappa. And this definition was given by Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer. A 7-judge bench actually gave a very interesting definition, and this is a definition which we follow till today in that regard, before this IRC comes through. What is the definition? It's a triple test. Triple test means 3 things have to be there for an entity to be considered a industry. Systematic, which is there is organized understanding. Employer-employee cooperation, second. And third, they produce goods and services for consumers. Meaning, if there is a systematic employee-employer relationship and they provide goods and services, this makes an entity an industry. This is the 1978 judgment, how industry is defined in the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. Now, if you actually look at it, it's a very open-ended, you can say, definition. This may not just apply to industries, what we call as manufacturing. It can further be applied to even hospitals. It can be applied to any entity where there is a management and there are employees and there is goods and services being produced. And because it includes services, you may not be physically producing something, but this definition was considered to be very, very, you can say, important. Why? Because it took into account educational institutions, hospitals, municipalities, other than anywhere there is a sovereignty or the sovereign nation involved or the state involved. For example, defense, judiciary, and law enforcement does not come into this. But nearly for a half a century, we have been using this definition. Now, the point of having this definition was because it is open-ended, it allows for better dispute resolution. So what you have to remember is that before this 9-judge bench has now reconsidered this concept, there were 3 important litmus tests or 3 indicators which made anything an industry, which is there is organized employee-employer cooperation for goods and services. And because of this, even teachers, because of this, even doctors, because of this, even the, you can say, the karamcharis and the lower level management, what we call as the basic rank and file of an industry, could go against an employer and then ask for dispute resolution. Now, to be very honest, this definition has its own context. 1978, pre-LPG era, there were more PSUs, and the idea was, the concept was that this definition has a socialistic understanding, wherein it has to be taking into account the right to organize and the idea that the workers are vulnerable against the employer. However, now the Supreme Court has argued that we don't need to per se stick with this definition. And under the new IRC 2020, they have not given a definition, but they are saying that we should now look for a specific and statutory context for an industry. Therefore, using this concept of industry as used in 1978 is not needed in the context of 2026. So the burden of the 1978 verdict should not remain with this new code. Now, the Supreme Court and the CGI has not defined the new concept of industry, but it now creates a problem. And the problem is that the new definition could then be anti-worker or could be against the interest of workers who are vulnerable to the employer itself. So between this Industrial Disputes Act and the new Industrial Relations Code itself, this definition of triple test, systematic, employer-employee, and production and supplies for satisfying human wants, this will be reformulated. And what is even more interesting here is that if you look at the judgment itself, it was not a unanimous one. There was a majority stance that we need to redefine and reconsider, but there were also minority stances which says that re-evaluation is unwarranted. There is no need to disturb industrial peace. There needs to be judicial consistency. There also is no need to touch something which is already perfectly fine. And that is where this article actually only gives you the problem. The problem is that the 1947 era triple test 1978 judgment, which defines the idea as a triple test, now that will be reconsidered and is open to interpretation. That is where we don't know how this definition will go forward. the judiciary will decide further, but it then basically disrupts something which was not broken per se. So this test of this concept will now be reconsidered. Unfortunately, the CGI or the Supreme Court has not given the new definition. And therefore, this is all up for judicial interpretation. And in an era where there is AI, machine learning, and the workers are even more vulnerable than what they were previously, there is now no exact definition of industry within the IRC 2020. Now, how UPSC, the problem with current affairs without having any static understanding is this only. What you have to do is you have to go through static understanding. What you should do is history, geography, economics, polity. These are 4 fundamental subjects. You should cover these and then go to current affairs. It will make more sense. I understand that these are very specific topics. Even the idea of a constitution bench or 9-judge bench, CGI, even the idea of industry may seem to be very, very, you can say, difficult to understand and fathom. But you have to understand one thing. What we are trying to do here is we are trying to give you the knowledge which is needed for prelims and mains both. Here, nothing out of the box has happened. Even a student who may be, for example, doing this for a year, these are new things to that person. You have to understand what is needed for the examination. So I'm telling you that what is the takeaway from here is the main point. The takeaway is that industry was defined in a certain way in 1947 and 1978 judgment is considered to be the landmark judgment here, where it created the triple test. 3 tests were there. It has to be systematic. It has to be at the same point of time employer-employee, and it has also to be the concept of goods and services, to be a service provider or a goods manufacturer. This definition was used to define anything within industry. What is important is it was a broad definition. Now, what you should remember is that now this is open to change because the Supreme Court has said that the 1978 judgment will not define industries. Rather, the specific context and the concept of a statutory understanding will be there. Does this reevaluate intends to cripple the interests of laborers? Isn't the triple test revamp? In a way, Manisha, that is the whole point. This was something where we can say that because it was broad definition, it was pro-worker. It was pro-worker and it was as open as possible. So therefore, not just industries, even institutions used to come into this context. But with the concept open for interpretation, now we can see, you can say, very narrow definitions or interpretations to come through. Now, this is where we don't know what is going to happen later, but we do know that this is going to open a new Pandora's box of problems. So therefore, if UPSC asks you a question like this, wherein it says that industries as defined by the 1978 judgment needs no reconsideration in the present labor context. Discuss. You can then first you have to know and you have to understand what is this 1978 judgment. How does it affect the employer? Most probably it is going to actually benefit the employer, because under 1978 judgment, industry is a generic word which is used for even hospitals could be considered an industry, even educational institutions can be considered an industry, even a corporate office is an industry. This, if changed, if the definition will change, most probably they will remove the workers actually in these three sectors to not have or to not be considered a industry itself. Therefore, the IRC code will not then apply. The point is that even today, if you are a corporate employee and there's a dispute between you and your employer, you can use the Industrial Disputes Act. But if the definition becomes narrow, then most probably you will not get the same safeguards as a worker in an industry or any other, you can say, institution which qualifies as an industry. Basically, by changing the definition, you can make the whole concept extremely narrow to only take manufacturing sectors in, or the what we call as real industries into context, and basically service industry could be removed out of it. When I say the word industry, the first thing which comes to your mind is a very big factory with smoke coming out of the chimney. But this is not the definition which basically the industry word used is in Industrial Disputes Act. They say that it should not be a physical factory per se. But the point is, if hospitals, educational institutions, corporates are removed, they may go for a definition where it is actually a proper industry itself. That is what the CGI is saying, which is we need specific context and statutory understanding, which we don't know how they will define. Rather than shaking the tree, first they should have redefined the concept of industry, but they've not done that. So therefore, this concept is an evolving one, and we will see how this goes forward. But do you understand what is the judgment of 1978 and how it is being reconsidered now? Are we clear about this concept? Yes or no? Come on, tell me. Are we clear about this? Okay. Now, with this, we move to the second topic. Is again from text and context, is about FDI. And there is a certain correlation which people are bringing in, which is press note 3 and FDI, how there has been certain changes which have been made. What are the areas we can extract from? First topic, prelims orientation, nothing. Mains orientation. From here, you will bring in that. What is the rationale of bringing such change? What would be the explained now seems corporate or regulation? That is the whole point, Manisha. It is a certain, you can say, unwarranted, even the minority report or the minority judgment within the judgment said that it's unwarranted. Maybe there is some form of pressure which has been created through this act or on the, you can say, or the judgment was given after certain arguments were given which made sense. It actually makes no sense per se, but there would obviously be a lobby which is trying to push for something like this, right? The present, see Tarak, the simple point is, the present judgment only says that we need to reconsider this definition, which is we will not make the new act hostage to 1878 judgment. That is the only thing which the Supreme Court has said. But that is in itself problematic because people are saying, even the bench said that there is no point in reconsidering something which is not broken. That is the whole point, right? Okay. Now, there has been an inflow of close to 5,000 crores through FDI recently. And there was a certain change which the government of India brought in. And you should know about that change because it is both relevant for prelims and mains. Now, the rule was very simple. And this is changes in the FDI rule itself. Before April 2020, before April 2020, if there was any foreign direct investment, which is an entity wants to directly invest in any of the industries in India or any entity in India, that foreign direct investment, if it was coming from Bangladesh and Pakistan, that FDI had to go through obviously what is called as governmental approval. That is quite obvious that existing rule was you need to get governmental approval if FDI is coming from an entity from Bangladesh or Pakistan. Nothing out of the box, we know that. But after April 2020, this rule was made even more, you can say, expansive, where it said that any FDI from a name, from any entity, from an entity placed in a country which has a border with India. And similarly, if the entity has investment or stake from any country which has a border with India, then again governmental approval was needed. So basically, this rule was changed through Press Note 3 by saying that if FDI is coming through a country that shares a land border with India, meaning Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, then again the same rules will be applied. So basically, we went from Bangladesh and Pakistan, and this whole concept was done for China. Nepal, Bhutan, not as big as a threat for FDI, but China was one of the biggest actors which we wanted to counter it. Now, people would argue that Press Note 3 was brought in because of the Galwan issue and what was happening along the LAC, but that is not true. This was done before that. The real reason Press Note 3 was brought in was because during COVID-19, a lot of the industries and a lot of the entities in India were reeling under a lot of losses, and China had come up with a certain strategy wherein they were buying majority stakes in most of these countries and in these entities through FDI. So basically, they wanted to safeguard the health, but also the sanctity of the ownership of that industry. So during COVID-19, a lot of the industries saw dips in their what is called as stock prices. China was what it was doing is was pushing in money and buying majority stakes in these countries through these what we call as entities or these companies itself. And India wanted to make sure that China would not be able to do it. And that is where Press Note 3 has come through. But what Press Note 3 did was, see, because of Press Note 3, it says China directly or through a company which is placed next to the border, both would get FDI through governmental approval. But what was happening was there were a whole set of entities which had Chinese investment, which was minority stake, and they were not a bordering nation, and they were also facing FDI governmental approval. So, for example, there is a small company in Seychelles which has 6% stake from China and it wants to invest into an Indian company. What was happening was, because China had a stake in that company, when it was applying for FDI into India, it was not through automatic route, it was actually through government approval route. That was complicating this whole story. That is why now the government of India recently relaxed Press Note 3 and brought in a new rule. And that rule was, if an FDI is coming from an entity into India where the country's stake, bordering nation stake, is less than 10%, then it can come through an automatic route. Basically, if there's a minority stake, then investment can happen into India via automatic route. This has allowed for a flow of close to 5,000 crores, and that too from Mauritius, US, Korea, Japan, Singapore, and even Cayman Islands, from entities which previously were debarred to do it. So therefore, there is a certain timeline which this whole concept is establishing. Pre-2020, it was only Pakistan and Bangladesh, April. Then it became any bordering nation. But it was not just for the Galwan issue, but rather for the pandemic problem. But the fix was any entity or any country, even bordering, if 10%, you can say, less stake is there, then automatic. So let's try to summarize this in the best way possible. April 2020, Press Note 3, Pakistan and Bangladesh, Press Note 3, bordering nation. Now, this is where basically the concept was, the entity which is trying to push FDI into India, that should not be placed and there should be no stake. Either way, it would need governmental approval. Now what they've done is, they have relaxed Press Note 3 and they have brought in this 10% clause. The 10% clause is, if less than 10% is there, does not matter the entity stake. Entity stake is less than 10% from any bordering nation, it can get FDI through automatic. Are we clear about this? Are we clear about this timeline? Yes or no? What you can get here is the Press Note 3 concept. They can ask you how this relaxation has impacted India. Therefore, there are 2 to 3 things which can be asked here. Pre-2020 baseline, the changes and why we have done it, and the outcome. This is the outcome. This is the outcome which is there. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Okay. So, 2 topics out of text and context, both interesting, both related to GS paper 3, and here we get some form of understanding of prelims also. Now, with this, so what you have to remember before we move forward, can there be relaxation of taxes or no, it is not taxes, only FDI. Before we move on to the next topic, please do understand 2 things we've learned. First, the definition of industries within 1978 Industrial Disputes Act is now going to be reconsidered and is open for interpretation later by the judiciary. Second thing which we've learned is Press Note 3 is basically a specific clause for any FDI coming from bordering nations or entities which have bordering nations stake. Previously, it did not matter how much the stake was. Anything would need governmental approval. Now, if it is less than 10% or 10%, automatic route FDI can happen from entities which may have Chinese, basically it's for China. FDI never will come from Pakistan. They don't have money itself. It will come from China. So basically, because China owns most of the entities in and around India, this was a safeguard to protect our own industries. Now we have removed it and made, if there's a minority stake, it cannot be a takeover. Simple. Right. Now, we already know that we are in an El Nino cycle. El Nino cycle, or what is called as ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation. Now, for any student who does not understand what is El Nino, in a very simple way, the between Tahiti and Darwin, which is Australia and Chile and Peru, you have the Pacific Ocean. Now, between Tahiti and Darwin, the surface temperature of water matters because it then controls the wind systems across the world and specifically in India and the Indian subcontinent in the Indian Ocean. Now, ENSO includes two things, El Nino and La Nina. Now, when there is a cold, you can say cold water here and hot water here, there is high pressure and low pressure, and the movement, which is called the equatorial countercurrent, is strong. However, in an El Nino year, warm water enters into the Tahiti, the Chile coast itself, and that in turn leads to the high pressure to go down, and the equatorial countercurrent then becomes extremely weak. Because this equatorial countercurrent later becomes a displaced southwestern monsoons itself, this oscillation matters in basically bringing in rain and monsoons into India. Along with the Indian Ocean dipole, I'm saying it in very simple manner. I'm not going to Walker cell and all. I'm not going to that. Simple, straightforward point is, if this current becomes extremely weak, the monsoons fail. And as it is, monsoons are erratic, but they fail. And if this current is strong, then further it will be displaced to become what is called as the equatorial countercurrent, will become basically the southwestern monsoons. And therefore, it has a very strong understanding vis-a-vis how rainfall will happen in India, but across the world also. If the reverse happens, which is it is very cold here and very high pressure, it becomes La Nina. Then there is flood-like situation across India and the Southeast Asian sector because it becomes extremely strong. So the idea is Pacific Ocean, 2 points, eastern and western. We take the surface temperature, we look at the high and low pressure. High pressure, if it is very, very strong, the monsoons will not fail. That is a normal or La Nina year. And if the high pressure weakens, then there is a El Nino year where the current, which basically is the Walker cell, will become, you can say, weak, in turn leading to the southwestern monsoons to become very, very weak and therefore failure of monsoons. Now, it's not that this is the first time we've gone into the El Nino cycle. One more thing which changes or impacts this concept is the concept of Indian Ocean dipole, which is surface temperature across the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal also. But the point is, when it comes to El Nino, we know we will have failure of monsoons. But what is alarming this time is that the surface temperature, when it is more than 0.5 degrees Celsius, the water surface temperature is more than 0.5 degrees Celsius, we argue that it is an El Nino year. But this time it is not 1 degree or 2 degree, it is already at 2.6 degrees. It is already at 2.6 degrees, and we believe that it will reach to 3 degrees Celsius above the norm, which means that this is going to be one of the strongest and the biggest in a century El Nino. And because El Nino is going to lead to drier conditions in Southeast Asia, Australia, Southern Africa, Northern Brazil, and wetter conditions in Horn of Africa, Southern United States, Peru, and Ecuador, there will be more flooding in the you can say sector of the Americas, and there will be more drier droughts and more scarcity of water in most of the parts of Southern Asia. And therefore, we have already reached 2.6 degrees Celsius. We have come to a point that 0.6 degrees was considered to be a El Nino. Now we are at 2.6 degrees. 2.6 degrees. Which is a pure indication of what is called as a global warming effect on El Nino itself. You will get the PDF in my Telegram channel. I've already uploaded yesterday's at Abhishek Mishra History. You will find it there itself. So let's be very clear. This article does not give us any new information, but the fact that this El Nino is going to break the records of the heat wave across Asia and the, you can say, flooding which is going to happen across these sectors of Horn of Africa and southern United States, Peru and Ecuador. 2.6 degrees. This is an important information for you. When you write an essay, when you write GS paper 3 answers, you can now include the fact that an El Nino, which was basically previously considered at 0.5 degrees Celsius above the norm, is now reaching to 2.6 degrees Celsius and is going to reach 3 degrees Celsius, which is indication of how severe El Nino has started to become. You can use this as a tangible indicator. Are we clear about these three topics, which is 1978 judgment of Industrial Disputes Act now being reconsidered, the idea that we have the El Nino at 2.6 degrees Celsius, 2.6 degrees Celsius, and also the fact that we have the press note 3 now being reconsidered. If we are clear about these three big topics, then we'll move to the other. So this is an indicator that we all in the world are not doing much. Yes, true. Be it the IPCC, be it everybody is talking about Paris Climate Agreement is a failure as of right now. Nobody is meeting their NDCs. Nobody is meeting their, you can say, goals vis-a-vis, and as it is because we have people like Donald Trump who are climate deniers, we are not doing enough. We are not doing enough. That is a given and that is obvious. We are not doing enough because this 2.6 degrees Celsius is indicative of what is the, see, 3 degrees is lot. From 0.5 to 3 degrees Celsius is a big jump in what is happening to the surface temperature. So in that way, this cannot happen at an individual's nation level. We all have to come together to understand that El Nino is becoming more and more severe, which is problematic. Okay. Now, we have an article from the Hindu newspaper which talks about a certain failure which is being talked about as a certain achievement. So there has been an in principle nod which has come from the Public Private Partnership Appraisal Committee, PPPAC, which has given in principle approval for privatization of 11 airports in order to make sure that they become some form of a profitable venture in that regard. Now, there are 5 bundles in which they have been pushed. You have Amritsar, Kangra, Varanasi, Gaya, Kushinagar, Bhubaneswar, Hubli, Raipur, Aurangabad, Tiruchirappalli and Tirupati. All are as of right now government run airports. They have been bundled together into 5 understandings and they will be then privatized. Now, what is alarming was that when last time the same concept happened, the Adani group got all the airports which were being privatized. This was one of the concerns which was raised within this committee. Therefore, they have said that this time we are going to put it into bundles and one company or single entity cannot get more than one bundle itself. So therefore, because 11 airport strategic locations all going to the same company, it makes no sense per se. So they are saying that if Adani wins this bid, then the other 4 bundles will have to go to some other entity, not Adani. So it is to basically undercut monopoly or oligopoly basic understanding. But we know that this is not a good development. This is not a good development because there is a failure of the state here that it is not able to run these, and most of these are actually, as of right now, non-operational airports also. In some of these airports, for example, Kusinagar and even Tiruchirappalli and even in Hubballi, there are 1 to 2 flights, and some places those also get cancelled because of no demand itself. So just creating airports is not the answer. Running them properly is also, and at the same point of time, privatization is good, but also will lead to further, you can say, if Udan scheme is a failure, accept it. Because then these private entities will ask for a lot of money for parking fees, and therefore, even if domestic aircraft, you can say, providers are going to go there, they will transfer that cost to the consumer. And therefore, if these airports were based on regional connectivity, they will not be accessible and, more than that, affordable for the people who want to use it. So therefore, this is not a good development per se, but at least the government of India has found a way to make sure that Adani, which won the last bid for all the airports which were available, will not get all 11. Let us see, it could be that Adani gets this would be subsidiary of Adani, this would be the second subsidiary of Adani, this could be the third subsidiary of Adani. For when it comes to these things, people know how to undercut the system also. It could be that also. We will see. Right. Okay. Privatization of 3 airports are tier 2. Yes, that is why, Anushka, we are talking about that. PDF I have already uploaded. If it is my responsibility, yesterday's session PDF I have already uploaded into my Telegram channel at Abhishek Mishra History. You'll find it. Same I will do again. Don't have to worry. When it comes to me, I put it into my Telegram channel. I know that you don't find it. Okay. Now, moving to the last 2 simple, straightforward topics. First is that the center has moved to make medical devices regulations easier. And the basic point is, it is too much red tapeism is there, and it's too confusing also. So basically, the Union Health Ministry has approved that they will amend the medical devices rules. And basically, the confusion comes in when sterilization of those, you can say, machines have to be done, the licenses have to be different. So the regulatory requirement as of right now is that a separate license for outsourced sterilization, and expanding the list of countries where approvals would automatically lead to better, you can say, clinical waivers. These 2 things are being done. So what used to happen is, if I am the supplier of the medical equipment, that is, 1 license is needed for that. If I'm sterilizing that, you can say, equipment, I would need another license for that. And therefore, 2 different licenses were needed. Now they are saying that there is no need to obtain a loan license for sterilization activity. That is the interesting aspect here. That separate loan license is not needed, and duplication of paperwork will not happen. So the old model was separate license for outsourced sterilization. New would be that you don't need a duplicate license. And if you are a EU entity, if that equipment is coming from the EU, you will get a waiver for certain jurisdictions and approvals. Previously, it was only for the US, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Japan. Now it will be for EU also. So again, ease of doing business, trying to bring in more sanity into this system, that you don't need same person has 2 licenses for the same thing. Makes no sense per se. So they basically have done away with that concept, and they're arguing that we don't need 2 separate licenses in that regard. This is the basic summary. We need to have reduced paperwork, less administrative burden, though traceability clause will still remain. That does not change. That traceability requirement will still be there. 6 months transition period has been also provided for the companies to modify labels and packaging. But the idea is that we had a very cumbersome regime. No duplication now needed. just need one license to be the provider, also the sterilization understanding. This ease of business understanding. Yes. It is Tarak for any nation, but China is the one which is actually doing it. It was any nation which is bordering to India. Now, the last topic is important for anybody who is going to give the examination for 2027 prelims and mains, because it is in your cycle that UPI has actually has completed its 10 years. So the UPI, Unified Payments Interface, which we use on a day-to-day basis, on 25th August 2016, it was launched, and in 2026, it has now completed 10 years. Now, this data is important for you because it will help you in the examination to give the quantum and scale. But UPI rules, regulations, and basics should now be on your fingertips, because there can be one question directly on the prelims, in the prelims examination, and on the UPI system in the mains examination. So, since its inception in past 10 years, from 1.78 crores transactions in 2017 to 24,000 crore transactions in the next 9 years, 13,000 fold increase in volume. Further, from only 0.07 lakh crore in 2017 to approximately 314 lakh crore now being pushed through the UPI system. 4,000% increase in the UPI system of value of transactions. 11 countries accept the UPI also as of right now. This is where this 13,000 fold and 4,000 fold, this is called as exponential growth. And therefore, if there is any question which says there has been an exponential increase and exponential growth in any form of transactions or UPI volume, the answer to that question is yes. So therefore, what we have discussed today is that the 1978 judgment, which defines the 1947 Industrial Disputes Act, what is called as the concept of industry, which is a triple litmus test of systematic employer-employee, and at the same point of time, the concept of what is called as goods and services. This is now being reconsidered under the Industries Regulation Code of 2020, which is now going to come into context. 9-judge bench has now said that we don't need to use the same definition per se. Thereafter, we tried to understand that El Nino quantum, and El Nino has now reached to a point that the surface temperature is reaching 2.6 degrees Celsius above the norm, which used to be considered to be 0.5 degrees Celsius previously, and therefore it is going to be the biggest. It is going to be the biggest El Nino. Then we have also understood how the press note 3 previously used to not allow any entity which was bordering to India to have FDI through direct route. Now we have amended it and said that if there is less than 10% stake, you can have FDI through automatic route. We also understood that 11 airports are going to be now what is called as privatized, and they have created the concept of 5 bundles so that not just one entity gets all the 11 airports in that regard. Further, we are seeing that the Medical Devices Act will be amended in order to make two things sure. One, which is that there will be no duplication and there will be no need for loan licenses, and at the same point of time, EU has been added for regulatory approval. UPI completes 10 years and has seen 13,000 fold increase in the number of transaction, 4,000 fold increase in the value of transactions. And as Anushka says, Singapore, France, UAE, Mauritius, Bhutan, Nepal, Qatar, Sri Lanka, along with Cambodia, Greece, and Maldives, except UPA. Right? Are we clear about it? If industry's definition is considered, then shouldn't they also provide specific definition? That is, Manisha, the whole point. They have talked about not giving not using the definition, but they have not defined it. That is why there's now a judicial lacuna which has been created, which will lead to narrow interpretations and even politics happening over it. Are we clear about all of these things? All clear? If yes, then I will close the session. I will see you on 31st, and at the same point of time, some of you first you can today at 3 p.m. Remember that the PPT for this session will be available in my Telegram channel at Abhishek Mishra History. You have to just go and enroll into it. Thank you. Take care.